This special presentation was produced in high definition by WEDU, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, the legislative session gets underway with tension rising between the governor and the House Speaker. In Washington, House Republicans start working on changing Obamacare. Tampa Mayor Bob Buckhorn decides he will not run for governor. And the mystery over what Scientology is planning for downtown Clearwater. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lorai.
Welcome back. This week our panelists are Amy Hollyfield is Deputy Managing Editor for Politics and Features at the Tampa Bay Times. Ernest Hooper is a columnist for the Tampa Bay Times and host of That's All I'm Saying here on WEDU. Barry Edwards is a political strategist, a radio commentator, and a Democrat. And Sharon Calvert is a conservative blogger and a Republican. Well, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming. Well, the legislative session kicked off this week with a State of the State address by Governor Rick Scott. In that speech, the governor vigorously defended Florida state agencies that recruit and subsidize businesses and promote tourism.
But you don't just give up and shut down. Take your ball and go home. You figure out what the problem is and you fix it. Let's remember, we are talking about people's jobs.
Those words were aimed at House Speaker Richard Corcoran, a fellow Republican who thinks the two agencies, Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida, represent corporate welfare. In his opening speech, Corcoran was defiant and vowed to set his own course.
And for those organizations and agencies unwilling to change, who somehow think that they're special, that they're exempt, that they're above the law, know this, that we will stand up and we will fight for the taxpayers. And we don't care if that battle takes place in committee rooms or courtrooms.
The day before the session opened, the head of Enterprise Florida, one of the agencies at the heart of the conflict between the governor and the speaker, suddenly resigned. Chris Hart had been in the job only a few weeks. In his resignation letter, he told the governor the two did not share a common vision for the agency. In a response to the governor's State of the State message, House Democratic leader Janet Cruz of Tampa said 20 years of Republican control in Tallahassee have resulted in tax breaks that have only benefited the privileged few.
The governor and the Republican leadership in this state want to create low-paying jobs that benefit the largest corporations because lower wages means higher profits for those at the top of the economic ladder.
Amy, the conflict between Richard Corcoran and Governor Scott, it looks like there are two trains on the same track running right towards each other. Would that be a fair estimate of what's going on?
I mean, it definitely is a nice battle that's going on. I feel like it's a sideshow. I don't feel like it's the biggest thing going on. It's certainly, you know, Richard Corcoran is a disruptor, and he's come out and he's attacked the governor, and he's actually gotten some good victories. You know, he sued for over this lottery contract, and he won. He got that pit bull contract out in the public, and he's already gotten his Enterprise Florida, Visit Florida legislation passed through the House just today. So, you know, there's some momentum there, but there's some bigger issues in Tallahassee, which is primarily money. There's not enough money to go around, and there's different ways that Richard Corcoran and Joe Negron, the Senate president, want to do things.
Why is there not enough money to go around? Because we've had tax cuts for years and years. The governor said tax cuts are going to result in more revenue for the state of Florida. What's going on that we don't have enough money?
It's just the perennial issue in state government where, you know, the economy is good, but there's just, you know, in terms of our population, in terms of programs, there's more money needed. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. And there's different ways that people want to do it. Richard Corcoran wants to cut from different organizations, agencies. Joe Negron wants to invest. He's got, you know, his priorities over
the Senate president wants to invest,
right,
yeah.
over water. He's got higher education, and it's just going to be interesting to see how they get into a center line.
Sharon, could I ask you? I mean, Amy said it was a sideshow, looking at Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida and the conflict between the governor and the House Speaker. Is it a sideshow, or is there a principle at stake? Is there something really at stake that they're both fighting for?
Well, I think there is something at stake, but at the end of the day, I agree. I think the outcome will be better. I mean, it'll be better for the taxpayers. So I say bring the battle on. Let's have it. It's gotten through the House. Let's see what happens moving forward. But at the end of the day, have these battles.
Is the governor likely to veto the budget if it doesn't contain money for Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida?
Veto the budget?
Yeah. You don't think so? He's not going to go that far.
I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, there will be something worked out. At the very least, it'll be reform, transparency, those kind of issues to make it better.
Mm-hmm. And to Amy's point, that the big issue this year is going to be money and where it's spent.
Right, it's priorities.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think the money's there. I mean, the governor's budget is up 1.2 or 3 billion from last year. So
is that if you include rising local property taxes?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got to include the value of local property rising,
Right.
but the state revenue is not up dramatically. It's not up by $1 billion.
No,
Yeah,
that includes.
Barry, what do you make of this tension between the governor and the speaker?
Well, when you're the supermajority or close to it, all the battles are within the family, and so we're seeing that happen now. But the problem is that the growth, when Governor Christ was his last year as governor, he dismantled the growth management laws that John Mills and Pat Neal wrote in 1984 when they were chairman of Natural Resources that had stood for 25 years. And because of that, the growth of Florida that the governor is so happy about is not paying for itself. That's why we're having budget deficits and why he's having to allow counties to raise millage to pay for school construction and things like that. So the fundamentals is he's getting cheap jobs that aren't producing enough income. And I think it is a matter of transparency. I think that a lot of the Democrats, Senator Roussan from here, has a bill that would make Visit Tampa disclose what they're spending their money on. They're the only entity in the state of Florida that takes bed tax money. They take 87% of the revenue, I think, is bed tax money, and is not a public entity. And I think so. Most of these contracts, like Pitbull, would not happen if people knew about them in the public eye. Mm-hmm. So we really need transparency, and that'll fix most of it. But I think people should be outraged. I agree with Speaker Corcoran. The independent peer-reviewed studies at universities are showing 2-3% returns on investment for these projects. That's not a good deal for us.
So you agree that they're corporate welfare?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no non-peer-reviewed study that is not paid for by a group that shows that these are good returns on investment. And that's the standard. Is it peer-reviewed and can it be replicated? And all the studies that these groups that they pay for themselves, they won't release their methodologies.
Ernest, I was surprised that Chris Hart stepped down as CEO of Enterprise Florida. He just was appointed to that position just a few weeks ago, steps down, and apparently disagrees with the governor. You know, how could that be? It
does make you wonder why he would take the job if he knew he was in disagreement with the governor. And I think, you know, it's a clear indication that the heat is being turned up on Enterprise Florida, and they are asking a lot of questions. Where I draw the line is between accountability and this notion of zero funding. There needs to be greater accountability. There needs to be greater transparency. But do we need to eliminate the agency completely? I think that's a dramatic step that, if anything, needs to happen incrementally as opposed to just getting rid of it with one swift bill. You know, haste makes waste. That's what I always learned in grade school, and I think it might apply here. They need to slow down a little bit.
Amy, another thing that they're looking at up in Tallahassee is foundations linked to universities. I was surprised at how big the budgets are for these foundations that are supporting Florida's university system.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting move by Speaker Corcoran, and I feel like there's going to be more of those. It just seems like he's on a path here of taking shots across the bow, and I'm wondering what's next. But certainly, I think that, you know, when you start to look at those foundations and the money they're bringing in and the conversation that's being had over higher ed funding, long-term conversations about state contributions to higher ed, it's interesting that he's trying to draw the parallel between the two and you know, hit them on one side and also not help them on the other.
And I think Corcoran is suggesting that the public university systems are awash in cash. It appears what he's saying.
But that's ignoring the fact that a lot of these foundations, that's private donations. That's not state money. Some of it, I think, is state money, but it's not, you know, the billions of dollars I don't think is state money.
So this comes from donors and alumni from the university.
Exactly.
Who are contributing back to their alma mater.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, in Washington, Republicans in the House are moving quickly to end the Affordable Care Act, including restructuring Medicaid for low-income people. The House Energy and Commerce Committee cleared the GOP bill on a party-line vote of 31 to 23 after 27 hours of debate. Tampa Democratic Congresswoman Kathy Castor is the vice-ranking member of that committee. She said it was unconscionable that the bill was passed without knowing the cost, the impact on the deficit, or how many Americans will lose their health insurance.
We do not know the precise impact on working families. It's not clear. But make no mistake, this destroys Medicaid as we know it. It is the fundamental reworking of that vital federal-state partnership.
Some Republicans don't like the bill because it leaves parts of Obamacare in place. The AARP, hospitals, doctors, and consumer groups have also come out in opposition. President Trump, though, has begun an effort to sell the bill to the American people. So, Sharon, is this bill good for the people of Florida?
Well, I think the bill, this first round, is not going to be what the final bill is. And we just got this bill this week.
But it's moving pretty quickly through the House.
It's moving forward, but I think that, and we heard from President Trump that he, when he tweeted, he said it's going to be out there for review and negotiation. So will he put his boxing gloves on and go out there and negotiate? We'll see.
Do you like the emphasis on tax credits? That is, that the subsidies for low-income people tend to go away, and now they'll be replaced by tax credits. Good idea?
Well, I think that what we have today with Obamacare was totally unsustainable. I mean, it's not. That's just one piece of it. My opinion is I would prefer a repeal bill, a clean repeal bill, and then move forward, because talking about the CBO, if you look back in 2010 on the CBO, what they scored Obamacare was what the reality has been. They missed the mark, right?
You're saying they were way off.
They were way, they were way off. So the problem is it's even difficult for the CBO to score these massive, programs.
But Sharon, isn't it true that in the past Republicans have been pretty firm about the CBO? They've been fans of the CBO. The current head of the CBO is a Republican.
I think people have. I mean, you saw Representative Castor, making the statement. They're, neutral party. But my point is, it's still these big, massive programs is difficult because a lot of the what they had said. I mean, Medicaid expansion that grew much bigger than what they had anticipated. People in the exchange was much lower than what they anticipated. And then, of course, Obamacare had all the taxes. So, I mean, part of this, it will be getting rid of the tax penalty, the mandate. But at the end of the day, I think what needs to happen is you have to get to where the cost is coming down. Right. That is key.
Well, I'm fascinated by this great debate between Democrats and Republicans and Republicans and Republicans and the president in the House. And we never talk about the health providers. And they, in my opinion, hold all the cards. And if it doesn't work for them, it's not going to work. The reason Obamacare became a flawed piece of legislation is because it stopped working for the health providers. And in some cases, they took some steps that were punitive. When the Justice Department blocked the merger between Aetna and Humana, suddenly Aetna had all kinds of problems with Obamacare. And they actually found a memo that said, we will poison the well, if so to speak, if the merger is blocked. So why aren't we talking to them and finding out what their role is in all of this? They seem to be like a silent partner, but they're most influential.
Barry, this bill is moving through the House. Do you think it's going to be good for the people of Florida?
No. Well, first of all, we're not doing anything for the people that are in the gap right now, the working poor that don't qualify for Medicaid but don't qualify for the Affordable Health Care Act.
Because Florida never expanded Medicaid under Obamacare.
Because Governor Scott didn't want to take the money. So those people don't have health care, so they're having to go to the emergency rooms, and Tampa General and Bayfront are having to subsidize, and the state's having to ultimately subsidize their health care. And we know emergency rooms the most. So we're not doing anything. And Republicans always say they care about the working poor. Well, why, if we care about the working poor, don't we provide them with health care? We're the only industrialized nation in the country, in the world that doesn't. So I think we're missing the whole debate. Is it part of the entitlement of being a citizen of your country? And I think most Democrats think it is. A lot of Republicans don't. I think Republicans are going to rue the day when they do this, and Republican children and people with pre-existing conditions are coming off the rolls and don't have health care and start voting against them.
What do you think about that, Sharon? Do you think that health care is a right?
Well, I don't find it in the Constitution. So
when it says promote the general welfare, then you don't think that.
But the problem is we've seen what doesn't work. So perhaps we need to look at a different solution. And how do you bring costs down? More competition. I mean, today, if you get your bill from your insurance company, can you understand it? I mean, if you look at the bill and you see a charge, which makes no sense, an adjustment, not a payment, and then something you may owe. There is no way we can even figure out the cost of what we're paying for our own health care.
Yeah, I go in and I get bill after bill after bill. I don't know when they're going to stop.
One of the largest percentages of health care is the administrative overhead. And so my Republican colleague here just gave me the opening they want. The cheapest and best way to get cost under control would be to have a single-payer system. Medicare, which is a non-welfare system that people pay in for their whole lives, Medicare is the most efficient healthcare provider in the world.
Well, it's hospital trust funds being depleted in 2028, I believe. So we're going to have issues with all the entitlements.
It looks, politically speaking, like the president does have a problem because the U.S. Senate members, Republicans, have come out against, several prominent Republicans have come out against this in the Senate. If it does pass the House, it's going to run into trouble in the Senate.
There's going to be some conversation. I agree with Sharon. I feel like there's a starting point and this bill's going to change because enough questions are being raised, and I don't think this opposition from the Freedom Caucus is going to just sit there and not be addressed. But 2 points I want to bring up. One, I think our governor, with his healthcare experience and his close relationship with the president and his ambitions in 2018, is going to have a role here just in terms of the conversation. I think he has not been overly complimentary of the bill. He said it's a start, but there's some concerns for Florida because there's some caps in this bill that have to do with age, that have to do with Medicaid. The amount of money that the state of Florida has spent on Medicaid in 2016 is what we'll be able to spend going forward. Well, that's a big problem in a growing state like ours.
Because 1,000 people move to Florida every day.
Exactly. So you're not going to have, soon enough, you're not going to have enough money, which is kind of ironic because Republicans have been fighting for years to get sort of a block grant for Medicaid so they could spend the money their own way, which is what we're talking about here. But it's not going to be enough money is the problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, after months of speculation, Tampa Mayor Bob Buckhorn announced that he's not planning to be a candidate for governor in 2018.
The Democrat says he does believe the state of Florida needs a course correction, but the timing would be a challenge for him and his family. With Buckhorn out, the spotlight now moves to other Democrats who've announced or who have expressed interest, like former Congresswoman Gwen Graham, Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum, Miami Beach Mayor Phil Levine, and Orlando attorney John Morgan.
So, Barry, why do you think Bob Buckhorn dropped out?
Well, I think that his whole appeal is he's a centrist. And unfortunately, both parties, the Republicans are lurching to the right, the Democrats are lurching to the far left. And his financial base, a lot of it was Republicans that are not going to support a Democrat for governor. So I think he was in a kind of a no man's land that really wasn't palatable for running statewide. It's the best place to be if you want to govern a city and move it forward. And so I hope in 8 years after the next mayor he'll come back and do it again, a la Dick Greco. But I think the big winners were, the I-4 corridor is where the votes are in a general election, not South Florida because of the demographics of the age. And we've seen that the last couple times. John Morgan now could occupy that ground. If John Morgan doesn't run, his old law partner, Charlie Crist, would be well positioned now to take the I-4 corridor back and be competitive.
You're not suggesting Charlie Crist
I am
to come back for governor. Sharon, just on that note alone, what do you think about Charlie Crist making a comeback for governor?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised at all of what he might do, but I think
What do you think his chances are?
No.
No way.
I think 3 strikes you're out.
Whereas Bob Buckhorn, I mean, what Barry said is true, a centrist, so okay. But there's other centrists in this race too. I think Gwen Graham might be considered a centrist.
Well, and there are people who are looking favorably upon her campaign because of her ties to Senator Bob Graham, of course, and the fact that she comes from the Panhandle. And the thought is that a Democrat who could pull at least a few percentage points out of the Panhandle would have a better chance of winning the entire state. But I like, when you start with name recognition and popularity, I think John Morgan.
He's the one to watch.
Well, I think Sharon's laughing.
No, he's got the name recognition.
But
he's got the Trump factor.
I was gonna say I laughed when Donald Trump first announced he was running, and I see similarities.
All right, so Amy, you're echoing that. He's got the Trump factor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, here's a businessman, outsider, popular. I mean, John Morgan's been all over TV, billboards. I mean, think about Bob Buckhorn. I mean, here's a mayor who doesn't have any statewide recognition, hadn't been raising money. John Morgan funded the whole medical marijuana campaign. I mean, here's a guy who is set up for a statewide campaign.
But there was that famous video where he's in Polk County after a debate about medical marijuana, and he's drunk in front of a crowd and kind of belligerent. But does that video come back to haunt him?
I mean, are we making the parallel between him and Donald Trump?
So videos don't hurt.
I'm not sure it would.
Doesn't Trump's success erase all of that?
I think the difference between there is that the Billy Bush video was after he was the nominee. Republicans and Democrats are not going to vote for cross-party because of something off color. They're going to hold their nose and vote for somebody they think shares their values. And once Trump came out for the pro-life position, the evangelicals locked into him. So Morgan is going to be able to be hit and defined in the Democratic primary. Remember, there's 2 elections, the primary and the general. Charlie Crist just showed after his divorce 4 hours at a town hall meeting, and he loved it. I haven't seen him as happy.
You were blowing my mind.
That is pretty amazing. Well, the Tampa Bay Times reported this week that the Church of Scientology is maneuvering to create a giant retail district that it will control in downtown Clearwater.
The Times based its report on 2 city officials who have met with Scientology's leader, David Miscavige. The plan involves the church, its parishioners, and others willing to buy all the property between Osceola Avenue, Myrtle Avenue, Pierce Street, and Drew Street. For years, city leaders have looked for ways to revitalize the area. The church has been buying property in the heart of Clearwater since 1975, much of it in secret. In the last few months, the church has bought $26 million of prime downtown real estate.
So, Ernest, Tampa has come back. Its downtown is coming back. St. Petersburg's downtown is really coming back. Why has Clearwater been slow to come back, and is Scientology retail the answer?
I'm not sure Scientology retail is the answer, and I think when you ask that question, you have to take that question to the Church of Scientology. They hold a lot of influence over downtown Clearwater. We know that the Clearwater Marine Aquarium was looking at a new location in downtown Clearwater, and the church blocked it. So the church is very influential. Nothing can happen there without the church's input, and I'm not convinced that retail is the right step. I think the revitalization we've seen in St. Petersburg and in Tampa have been driven by residents and a kind of live, work, play mix. And I'm not sure an outdoor mall, as they've termed it, includes that live, work, play mix.
We're seeing a lot of retail close down. Macy's is closing some of its stores. Yeah, Penny's is closing some of its stores.
Retail is struggling. Amazon is striving as people order more and more and do more and more shopping online. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I will say this, though. I've been to concerts at Coachman Park. I love Coachman Park. I don't live in Clearwater, but I would love to see that downtown take off, and I hope they work it out. Yeah. It is.
Hey, Amy, real quickly, we only have about 30 seconds, but it raises a question. If you are a not-for-profit, how do you operate a retail facility? And when you buy the land, is that land now taxed for retail, or is that land still not-for-profit?
It would be taxed for retail because of the businesses. But 2 points I want to bring up. One, the Church of Scientology doesn't exactly have a record as being a master at development. So why should we trust that they would be the right people to be in charge of this? I mean, they brought a Starbucks to downtown Clearwater, but why does that seem like a good idea? But also, it seems concerning that this isn't being done in the public. This is a private conversation, and it doesn't seem right to sort of hand over your downtown to someone without proper vetting or a partnership.
It is a major step, yeah. Well, before we go, what other news stories should we be paying attention to? Ernest, your other big story of the week.
Rob, I got the pleasure of meeting Sheila Johnson, who is the owner of Salamander Resorts, and she's hosting the Valpar Golf Championship this week. She was honored by the University of South Florida College of Business, and I hear a lot of speakers. I go to a lot of events, but I have to tell you, I was so impressed with the stories she shared, the humility she displayed, and the confidence she exhibited in becoming this incredibly successful businesswoman who just happens to be African American. I don't want to call her a successful African American businesswoman. Right. She's a successful woman who just happens to be African American, and I was really inspired by what she had to say.
Yeah, that tournament at Innisbrook's a lot of fun too. I go there a lot. Sharon, your other big story.
Well, I'll be watching a bill that's coming out of the Ways and Means of the House Committee that looks to rein in local sales tax referendums, including requiring a 60% majority, which amendments require today.
And you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a good idea.
All right, Barry, your other big story.
Every 20 years, the governor, Speaker of the House, Senate President, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the Attorney General get to appoint 37 people to the Constitution Revision Commission that can put things directly on the ballot. And Tampa Bay is really blessed this year, mostly due to Speaker Corcoran. Speaker Corcoran appointed Senator Lee from Tampa, Senator Rouson from St. Petersburg himself, and Chris Sprawls, the Speaker designee from Tarpon Springs, and Arthenia Joyner, a former senator, was appointed by the Chief Justice. So Tampa will have 5 of the 37 people on the CRC going forward, which is a real big deal because they can put things directly on the
Carlos
ballot.
Baruf heads that. He is not an attorney.
Carlos is not an attorney. He's a very successful businessman, as we saw, because he was able to spend a lot of money. And hopefully he will go back to the days. If you judge him like he did when he ran Swift Mud, he's a good guy. If you judge him like he ran for Senate, not so much.
All right, Amy, your other big story.
Curtis Reeves was denied his Stand Your Ground petition in that horrible movie theater shooting, so he's going to stand trial, which is just interesting given that the legislature is talking about strengthening the Stand Your Ground law and thinking about this particular case going to trial.
Yeah, that video, watching the testimony, determining whether or not he could use the Stand Your Ground defense was riveting.
Absolutely.
Riveting.
It'll be a very interesting trial later this year.
Okay. Well, thank you all for a great show, and thank you for watching Florida This Week. We welcome your comments. Our address is ftw@wedu.org. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, too. To watch this show online, you can find it at wedu.org. It's pledge time again here at WEDU. We hope you'll continue your support of Florida This Week and all the other great programs here on your PBS station. Please join us again next Friday night at 8:30 and Sunday afternoon at 12:30. And from all of us at WEDU, have a safe and happy weekend.
Florida This Week is a production of WEDU, who is solely responsible for its content.